Hi, everyone. Welcome back to 165CL. We're in week 10 now, so we're just about wrapping up our quarter. What we're going to do today is we're going to take those three different steel samples that we've heat treated to have different microstructures. We're going to etch the surfaces and then perform optical microscopy so that we can see evidence of those microstructures. And remember, we also measured hardness, so we want to make sure that we interpret all these things together. So the reason we're going to etch is that we want to selectively degrade the surface of these materials. The basic idea is pretty simple. So you want to polish to make sure you have a nice, flat, perfect surface. You then want to remove material from that surface. And you're taking advantage of the fact that when I remove material from the surface, it doesn't happen at the same rate everywhere. Near defects, I can have all kinds of different defects, things like dislocation, stacking faults, second phases, even crystalline grain boundaries. The lattice distortion in the strain fields, and then also the fact that sometimes you have impurity atoms that's concentrated at those defects is going to mean that our local etching rate will change. So if we take our original surface, it's sort of shown here, there's all these hidden defects underneath the surface, and we etch it, what we'll find is that different parts are removed at different rates. So the perfect crystal is removed at a given rate, seen by the fact that I could draw another flat line, which would hit where all the perfect surfaces are. But then all those places where I had defects, they've etched or been removed faster, okay? You can do lots of things with this basic idea. Even if you just had a single phase material, you could go and etch, and these darker regions are where it's etched faster at grain boundaries, and you can go in and see the crystal structure. This is a common thing we do in material science research if you want to understand something like what's the average grain size of our material. But you can also go in and see different phases. This bottom example is actually from a steel sample, and we're going to see something similar in one of our materials where they've etched, and these brighter regions are the primary ferrite regions, and these dark regions are a sign that they have some cementite in their microstructure. So they're seeing the two phases are showing up in different ways here. So we need to go and pick an etchant for our materials. Remember, we're just looking at a low carbon steel. You could find this online or do something like that. My research is in metallurgy, so I have this book, this Smithell's Metal Reference Book, and I can go in here and look up iron and steel and pick out different choices for etchants. I just scanned and showed you this picture here. The first two that it mentions are what's called nitol. It's nitric acid plus ethanol, and then what's called picrol, which is picric acid and ethanol. So it's in both cases, it's mainly an alcohol, and then there's some mixed in some acid in there. Okay. There's lots of other options. So here showing a bunch of other options which build on this and add more and more complexity. These higher number ones are really something if you have a very specific type of steel that you're interested in rather than just a general low carbon steel that we care about. So we're going to look at these two first. And if you look at the remarks or the sort of traits of what it can do, this nitric acid plus ethanol, it goes and it shows the grain boundaries in the ferrite and also darkens pearlite so that you can go and see that two-phase separation, okay? The picric acid plus ethanol is actually best at determining the details of pearlite and bainite, okay? So in our case, we don't really have a bainite sample, so the main motivation for using this one isn't there. So we're gonna pick that nitol example. So what you can do is I went into the lab and took all these samples, repolished them, etched the surfaces, and looked at them in the microscope. So take a minute to click on this link. Again, it's in the slides I posted, or you can find it on our homepage in Canvas. And I'll walk you through the steps of how I etched these samples and looked at them. All right, so this is what my etch samples look like from afar. You can see that that perfect mirror finish now has this cloudy appearance in all these cases. And even just to the eye, they don't all look exactly the same. Some are darker than others. And then if I look at the lowest magnification, so just 5x, I can see that the surfaces look pretty different. So both the martensites almost look dirty. They look like there's a lot of contrast there. I can't really tell what's happening. But we can immediately contrast that with what we see in the perlite. In the perlite, even at this low magnification, it's easy to see those large bright regions. Those are that primary ferrite that formed. Remember, we're not right at the eutectoid point, so that's some of the primary ferrite that formed. And those dark regions are perlite regions. Let's look at each one of these one by one. This is showing that quenched martensite. This is the one we cooled down from that 1,000 degrees C very quickly, and that's all we did to it. As we go down in magnification, this dark region, you can start to see some bright spots in here. And then even at our highest magnification of 50x, you can still see a lot of that dark contrast. So these dark regions, for example, these striped regions here are the martensite. And you can come and find some ferrite in there that's stuck in there. But most of my material is this alternating pattern of very, very dark regions for the martensite. Next, we can look at the tempered martensite. Remember, this is the sample we quenched down and then heated it back up and let it sit to try to coarsen that martensite microstructure. So early on, it looks very similar. It's dark and has that mottled contrast. But as we go down to the finest magnification, we see that the microstructure looks quite a bit different. You still see those dark regions, but they're not as finely spaced. And then you see a lot more of this bright region, which generally is going to be either the ferrite or maybe some retained austenite in my microstructure. Finally, we'll look at the perlite. Again, we could see those two phases even in our lowest magnification sample. If we jump down and finally to the highest magnification of 50x, you can see these big blobs of the ferrite and then some regions within them, light and dark contrast. This is our perlite. And remember, we let it sit at that high temperature for a long time. So that very fine perlite, which may have formed early on, can then coarsen and become a little bit more broadly spaced between the two phases. Just to make that comparison a little bit more clear, if we go and take the 50x images for those three samples, I can put them right next to each other. I could go and do something really simple, like say, okay, these bright regions, these are those soft ferrite regions. What's the spacing between those in each case? And draw a little red line in each case. And I could tell that even without making really quantitative measurements that, this maybe is something like a micron for the quenched martensite, maybe even smaller. For the tempered martensite, it's a few microns. So maybe, 2 to 5. And then for the perlite, this is, 15 to 20 microns spacing, okay? And remember that oftentimes, when you go back to our mechanical properties classes, that the distance between obstacles ends up being pretty important. And we can see that there's that inverse correlation with our hardness. So our material with the finest spacing inside the microstructure has the highest hardness. The one with that largest spacing has the lowest hardness. Okay, so now you have everything you need to analyze this. We talked about our different heat treatments and how we're moving in different places on the TTT diagrams. We went and measured hardness of all of our three materials. And then finally, we have the microstructure to go in and analyze and understand that data that we have.